David still kind of understandably doesn't want his child to die, pleads with the Lord, fasts, so then the child ends up still dying from the illness. Evidence right here in the Bible that not every prayer gets answered the way we hope it will. What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. All right. So we're looking at 2 Samuel chapter 12. Almost had a bit of Sean Connery come out there. But, so David's king, there's been fighting going on. At a particular moment when David did not go out to war with his soldiers, he got tempted and wound up sleeping with another man's wife. He tried to cover it up. That didn't work. So then he has the husband killed and then marries the woman he slept with. So, not a good look for David this past chapter. Which is unusual. Like, David's actions up to this point have pretty much been, free of anything that would cause him trouble or, make him look bad or even just be any kind of worthy of rebuke. But as you can see from the section title here, he has clearly done some things worthy of rebuke. But let's get to it. 2 Samuel chapter 12. So the Lord sent Nathan the prophet to tell David this story. There were two men in a certain town. One was rich and one was poor. The rich man owned a great many sheep and cattle. The poor man owned nothing but one little lamb he had bought. He raised that little lamb, and it grew up with his children. It ate from the man's own plate and drank from his cup. He cuddled it in his arms like a baby daughter. One day, a guest arrived at the home of the rich man, but instead of killing an animal from his own flock or herd, he took the poor man's lamb and killed it and prepared it for his guest. Okay, so that's just a story. Kind of maybe even a parable of sorts, you might say. I know we tend to associate parables with the New Testament and Jesus, but they weren't an entirely new construct in Jesus' time. This was kind of a similar story meant as an allegory for other real things. But, so, the Lord sends Nathan to David to tell him this story. And, obviously, this does not seem just or right or fair. Which is why we get David's reaction like this in verse 5. David was furious. As surely as the Lord lives, he vowed, any man who would do such a thing deserves to die. He must repay 4 lambs to the poor man for the one he stole and for having no pity. Then Nathan said to David, "You are that man. The Lord, the God of Israel, says, I anointed you king of Israel and saved you from the power of Saul. I gave you your master's house and his wives and the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. And if that had not been enough, I would have given you much, much more. Why then have you despised the word of the Lord and done this horrible deed? For you have murdered Uriah the Hittite with the sword of the Ammonites and stolen his wife. From this time on, your family will live by the sword because you have despised me by taking Uriah's wife to be your own." So, the story was actually basically representing David as the rich man who is taking from the poor man. The poor man in this case being Uriah. And, David literally took Uriah's wife. And not only that, Now, he did not kill Bathsheba, but David did kill Uriah because of taking his wife. So, like, it's a similar amount of death comparing real life to the story, except real life was a human death rather than a lamb dying. So that's even worse, really. And now, in a way, David has to be mad at himself. I mean, or at least he was mad because of the story, and now he's being told that he's the rich man who did these horrible things. Then we get to verse 11. This is what the Lord says. Because of what you have done, I will cause your own household to rebel against you. I will give your wives to another man before your very eyes, and he will go to bed with them in public view. You did it secretly, but I will make this happen to you openly in the sight of all Israel. Yeah, so God, I mean, isn't just going to let David's actions slide just because he's the king. And in a way, I mean, David said that the rich man should repay the poor man for what he stole. Obviously, David can't repay Uriah because Uriah is dead now. But there can still be, you know, a punishment that is similar to what David did, in a way at least. Now, he does not say that David's going to die because of this, but he is going to lose people close to him because of it, including wives. Which, polygamy is a whole nother thing. Like, it's generally pretty much any instance of polygamy, even in the Old Testament, is like, you see by the end that it's probably ill-advised. So it's not necessarily that God was okay with it and thought it was totally fine back then. It was something that people did whether or not they should have. But anyway, on to verse 13. Then David confessed to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. Nathan replied, Yes, but the Lord has forgiven you, and you won't die for this sin. Nevertheless, because you have shown utter contempt for the word of the Lord by doing this, your child will die. So it's kind of implied there that it's the child that he had with Bathsheba. It's not stated outright there, but still. You know, rightfully, God was upset, and as stated before, David will lose people close to him, including this child. Now, note there, at contempt for the word of the Lord, Masoretic text reads, the enemies of the Lord. Well, now, okay, hold up. Because that would then read, like, because you've shown utter contempt for the enemies of the Lord. Now, granted, Uriah was a Hittite, not an Israelite. He may have lived in Israel, because Israel had a lot of conquests around that time, partially because of David's rule. But the main point, though, is that, like, David blatantly disobeyed God's word and his commands. Then We get to verse 15. After Nathan returned to his home, the Lord sent a deadly illness to the child of David and Uriah's wife. Okay. David begged God to spare the child. He went without food and lay all night on the bare ground. The elders of his household pleaded with him to get up and eat with them, but he refused. Then on the 7th day, the child died. David's advisors were afraid to tell him. He wouldn't listen to reason while the child was ill, they said. What drastic thing will he do when we tell him the child is dead? So, yeah. Unsurprisingly, God makes good on what he says through Nathan will happen to David's child. And it is specifically David and Bathsheba's child. And the child dies due to illness. But David still kind of understandably doesn't want his child to die. Pleads with the Lord, fasts, does what he can to try and make it up to God. But of course, we can't just we can't be good enough to make up for our evil, our sinful nature. And so then the child ends up still dying from the illness. Evidence right here in the Bible that not every prayer gets answered the way we hope it will. So the child died. The advisors don't want to tell David because he wouldn't eat while the child was still alive. They're like, how much worse is he going to respond when he hears the child is dead? And then we get to verse 19. When David saw them whispering, he realized what had happened. Is the child dead? He asked. Yes, they replied, he is dead. Then David got up from the ground, washed himself, put on lotions, and changed his clothes. He went to the tabernacle and worshipped the Lord. After that, he returned to the palace and was served food and ate. His advisors were amazed. We don't understand you, they told him. While the child was still living, you wept and refused to eat. But now that the child is dead, you have stopped your mourning and are eating again. Yeah, it might seem a little confusing to them that, David's practically more troubled while the child was still alive than after the child died. I imagine we'll get an explanation soon, but David's not dumb. He realized that they were talking about this, and they're not going to lie to him. They weren't planning on telling him if he didn't directly ask, but not a good idea to lie to the king, though. So David gets up, cleans himself up, literally, and pretty much goes back to maybe not normal, but better. Hebrews says he anointed himself rather than saying he put on lotions. That's a similar kind of thing, although anointing implies maybe a more ritualistic kind of action. Even a further desire to cleanse himself, which was commonly required when people became unclean or even just sinned in certain ways in general, disobeying God's laws. So, the advisors are confused, and then we get to verse 22. David replied, I fasted and wept while the child was alive, for I said, perhaps the Lord will be gracious to me and let the child live. But why should I fast when he is dead? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him one day, but he cannot return to me. Then David comforted Bathsheba, his wife, and slept with her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son, and David named him Solomon. The Lord loved the child, and sent word through Nathan the prophet that they should name him Jedediah, which means beloved of the Lord, as the Lord had commanded. Okay, so David was, as I kind of said before, David was basically trying to negotiate with God, or, get God to have pity on his son. But, or the child. I don't know if the gender of the child is even specified here. But David's trying to, convince God to have mercy on the child and spare them. I don't know. Anyway, pronouns and grammar. David, upon realizing that the child died, is like, well, there's nothing more I can do here, so let me pick myself up and move on with my life. And then he goes to comfort Bathsheba, which is definitely helpful then that he has stopped pleading and mourning and, cleaned himself up so that he could then better comfort Bathsheba. And then they end up having another child. And, okay. Hebrew says he. So we read, she became pregnant and gave birth to a son, and he, which David was the last man mentioned, so that would make sense. Just the, but an alternate Hebrew reading and some Hebrew manuscripts read she. So it could have been David that named him Solomon, or it could have been Bathsheba. Either way, it was one or both of them. But God actually wants the child to be named Jedediah, which it explains right there. It means beloved of the Lord. Noted as the Lord had commanded. That says in the Greek version. Hebrew reads because of the Lord. Same general gist there, though. Okay. Then we move on to verse 26. I think I'm just going to read through the rest of the chapter and then give some other thoughts on that. Meanwhile, Joab was fighting against Rabbah, the capital of Ammon, and he captured the royal fortifications. Joab sent messengers to tell David, I have fought against Rabbah and captured its water supply. Now bring the rest of the army and capture the city. Otherwise, I will capture it and get credit for the victory. So David gathered the rest of the army and went to Rabbah, and he fought against it and captured it. David removed the crown from the king's head, and it was placed on his own head. The crown was made of gold and set with gems, and it weighed 75 pounds. David took a vast amount of plunder from the city. He also made slaves of the people of Rabbah and forced them to labor with saws, iron picks, and iron axes, and to work in the brick kilns. That is how he dealt with the people of all the Ammonite towns. Then David and all the army returned to Jerusalem. Now, okay, you might wonder, especially if you missed previous chapters, what's the problem with the Ammonites? Why were they fighting so much? And why would David treat the Ammonites so harshly? As I recall, and I can go back to that chapter to confirm, but yeah, it was the Ammonites, I'm pretty sure. Yep. King of the Ammonites. Yeah. So it was the Ammonites who, upon the death of their one king and his son becoming the new king, it basically disrespected David's messengers and got on David's bad side. So David, fights against them, and now he's actually, like, even more so joining the battle. And that's where he should have been in the first place. So in a way, like, the start of this story with David and Bathsheba and whatnot, like, he started off in a place where he kind of shouldn't have been. Maybe he was hanging back because of thinking maybe more troops were not needed, or wanting to reserve some defenses for, the home front. Whatever the case was, David was kind of not where he should have been. But this, now, with him going into the battle, kind of reflects that he's going where he should have been in the first place. And in a way is also reflective of his relationship with God being kind of set back on the right track. But, Joab was still making progress against the Ammonites without David and the rest of the troops. But Joab's like, hey, we're getting close to taking over the city. I could use a little help. So then David and the others come, reinforce, and they capture the Ammonite capital of Rabbah. And then they get a bunch of plunder from it. And they kind of subjugate the remaining Ammonites. Bunch of notes to look at here. When it mentions the royal fortifications, or it could just be read as the royal city, which would have been Rabbah anyway. Still, they conquered the capital. That's the short version of it. Captured the city of water, rather than saying captured its water supply. It was possible that some towns had more water at the ready and, available to retrieve. And they might have, sent that to friendly neighboring towns and whatnot. So, but either way, it's the water supply. At least the primary one. Note there at King's Head, or from the head of Milcom, as in the Greek version. Milcom, also called Molech, was the god of the Ammonites. Okay. So in that case, it would be saying David removed the crown from the god of the Ammonites, which is a bit of a different situation. That probably would have been taken off of, like, some kind of statue or something then. But in any case, he took a symbol of, glory and honor from the Ammonites, and that then became his. Note there at 75 pounds, Hebrew says 1 talent, which is believed to be roughly 34 kilograms, and probably from the kilogram measurement is where they derived the 75 pounds here. Note it forced them into labor. Hebrew says he also brought out the people of Rabbah and put them under saws, iron picks, and put them to work with, essentially, is what that's saying either way. So, same meaning, different words. Noted the brick kilns. He made them pass through the brick kilns. I'm not real familiar with, you know, methods of manufacturing from back in those times. I mean, I know brick kilns would have been hot things that you know, put the bricks in to harden them and all that. I don't know if they would have been designed in such ways that physically passing through them would have been safe or not, so I can't say for sure what the deal was here. I still think it was more so just like, you know, in tandem with these other things. Basically, they were worked very hard. Did a lot of tough manual labor. But that is all that we've got for 2 Samuel chapter 12. Okay, so Nathan basically calls David out on what he did wrong and tells him that God is going to punish him for doing these things. David tries his best to, like, kind of appeal to God to not kill this child, but it was kind of already decided by God that that would be the consequence for David doing these things. At least part of the consequence for it. But ultimately, you know, that happens, and David's like, well, okay, I did all I can. Let me pick myself back up again and, you know, move on with my life. And, you know, he still winds up having a son with Bathsheba anyway. I'm not going to say, like, it all worked out exactly. But it's not like one series of bad decisions winds up defining David's entire life from that point forward. So, that's all I got for this one. As always, like and share if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell if you're on YouTube to get updates when I post new videos. If you're seeing me anywhere else, give me a follow or whatever you got to do there. Make sure you look down in the description to get info on other social media pages, and you can find links to find and follow all those different platforms. And of course, leave comments down below the video and all that kind of stuff with any thoughts you have. So that'll do it for now. I hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video. But whatever the case is, till next time, stay cool, people.